3CR Radiothon 2024, Sound On for Solidarity.
Coming up is a podcast brought to you by the dedicated and diverse volunteers at 3CR. Just a quick message before you get there. For the month of June, we're asking listeners to donate to the station to help us keep going. We rely on the generous donations of community to survive. Go to 3cr.org.au/donate and show your support for community-owned and community-run media. Thanks for your support and happy listening.
Sabah al-khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. Today, we're going to speak about the Northern Front, north of Palestine, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Benjamin Netanyahu's desire to stay in power and what that looks like regionally. And I'm very honored to be joined by Professor Joseph Daher, who is an expert in Middle East, but in particular on Hezbollah. He's joining us from Switzerland. Good morning, Joseph.
Morning. Thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to be with you.
It's fantastic that you've joined us today. Joseph, we know the situation in Gaza continues unabated, 266 days of genocide. The world remains silent and complicit in what's happening there. But it looks increasingly like Israel is going to expand their operations north. And that's going to trigger a response. We've already seen, if you will, poking of the eye, poking of the bear, but there's movement of troops, etc. What do you think is going to happen, Joseph, and what's going to be the trigger?
Yes, thank you. Your question is very important. I can't say what is going to happen, unfortunately. Otherwise, things would be much more easier and I could possibly have an influence on it. No, more seriously, I think what we're witnessing is an escalating discourse to legitimize a potential war on Lebanon. This has been also, we've seen increasing attacks from the Israeli occupation army against Lebanon, not only on the south, just for maybe to remind everyone, in the south, 100,000 of Lebanese people have been displaced forcefully because of Israeli attacks. And Israel is trying to create a form of no man's land in south of Lebanon by destroying civilian infrastructures, agricultural lands, etc., to achieve potential military objective of pushing Hezbollah further away, at least 10 kilometers away from the border with historical Palestine, currently Israel. And what is even more worrying, I would say, in the past few weeks, not only an escalation in Israeli attacks, announcement, that from various Israeli officials that Hezbollah could be destroyed in several days, is from the US, I would say. For the first time the last week, US officials have clearly stated that they would, stand with their ally Israel in the case of a war with Lebanon. And this is the first time basically giving kind of not a green light yet, but an orange light for potential war. In the past few days, Israeli officials have been in Washington to accelerate the transfer of weapons, not only regarding Gaza, but also potentially with Lebanon. Finally, an additional maybe element to take into consideration is this very weird article that was published in Telegraph reminding us of old tactics to basically try to legitimize, a potential war by saying, the airport of Beirut is basically an infrastructure for stockpiling rockets from Hezbollah, etc., with sources that were denied afterwards. So it's, the situation is very worrying. regarding a potential war of Israel against Lebanon.
And we've seen this concept where Israel determines that if civilian infrastructure is in fact military, so that they can bomb it, whether it's Al-Shifa Hospital, etc., Gaza. And now already the language is starting on civilian infrastructure in Lebanon. With respect to that, it's almost 9 months now, a nuclear armed state with unrestricted aid, militarily, diplomatically, media from the West to destroy, quote unquote, Hamas. To this point, they haven't been able to destroy Hamas. That has been occupied and brutalized and sieged for 17 years. How can they even think that a few days is going to finish Hezbollah?
Well, I think you stated out things very clearly. Despite official Israel stated objectives regarding the destruction of Hamas, but we know that this is impossible, even in the words of Israeli officials, Israeli army officials that said basically we cannot destroy Hamas. Moreover, there's a willingness to basically transform Gaza in an unhospitable place to live and make, basically a continuation of the Nakba of 48, because the catastrophe, the big catastrophe that led to the creation of Israel, but moreover to the displacement of over 700,000 of Palestinians, has not been only a punctual moment in history. It's been a process and continual process to forcefully displace Palestinians because this is connected to the nature of the Israeli state, which is a settler colonial state that want to eliminate basically the indigenous population, as Australia, North America, this kind of project. And what was witnessed today regarding the Gaza genocide is a continuation of the Nakba linked to this nature of the Israeli state. And when it comes to Lebanon, I think we also need to understand this basically in the nature of the settler colonial state of Israel, saying basically, we are playing a particular role in this region as the avant-garde of Western imperialism. And therefore, any kind of actors in the region that do not, that challenges in some way or another Western imperialism must be defeated. So this is also connected to the the willingness of Israel to challenge, Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is not to say that, there's a lot of criticism that can be made against Iran regarding its authoritarianism. It's not at all challenging, I would say, any kind of authoritarian systems in the region, neither Hezbollah. But it is clearly Israel wants to basically try to challenge, Iranian-connected influence as well as Hezbollah. That is basically the most successful experience of, export of the so-called Islamic Revolution to Lebanon that created Hezbollah. So today what we're witnessing is Israel attempts to try to, reassure its own population by launching a potential war with Lebanon. And also we have to take into consideration, Israeli internal dynamics. This is a way for Netanyahu also to consolidate its coalition with the far right and the fascistic groups against, I would say, in the Israeli political scene, center right, that is more connected to, the US, that is more supported by the US, but also, so these are all these considerations to take into consideration to understand Israeli escalating violence against Lebanon, threats of war against Lebanon.
Joseph, you spoke about the ongoing Nakba, the making Gaza uninhabitable, and a zone. The Israeli generals used to talk about the northern border of Israel, quote unquote, should be the Litani River. Do you foresee a circumstance where a situation where the hellfire that's been rained down upon Gaza to make it uninhabitable, to in fact create a slow burn ethnic cleanse, because everybody's going to have to leave, while the place is rehabilitated and rebuilt? That this is the same sort of operation that's going to be hit. I mean, 2016 was an abomination. but Hezbollah defeated them then. We know what happened in 2000. Here we are, the fighters are smarter, more trained. The Israelis have suffered significant losses. This is not going to be a walk in the park. It's not 1982 again.
No, definitely, you're totally right. What I think is important to take into consideration is that Hezbollah had made very clear that although they don't want a war, that they have presented themselves as a front of pressure against Israeli state and trying to assist as much as they can Palestinians in their struggle, which there's a whole analysis to do like this. But it's very clear that Hezbollah has continuously said they don't want a war. But at the same time, they also made very clear that they are ready for a war. And in the case a war would start, the consequences for the Israeli state would be very high. And in the past few days or past few weeks, you've seen in Hezbollah political messaging, increasing also threats against Israel. For example, you had the Hezbollah drone going over Haifa, showing particular videos, images of the city. Afterwards, you had a TV report showing strategic civilian and military infrastructures of various cities within Israel that could be targeted by Hezbollah. So Hezbollah had made very clear to try in a form of modes of deterrence. Obviously, Hezbollah has not similar military capacities, but they have increasingly been expanding their military capacity since 2006. They benefited from, Iranian military provision. They've been, and most probably Iran has been increasing its provision of military capacity since the 7th of October. So a potential war will be also very costly for Israel. And another element to take into consideration, I think that is important, that a potential war between Israel and Lebanon will not be only delimited to Lebanon. It will most probably explode the region much more widely. Maybe, a potential Syrian front could open. This is very clear that, already allies of Iraq, allies of Iran in Iraq are very clear that they will enter also a potential war. We have also the Houthis, etc. So this could create, even further escalation of tensions within the region. And this is especially why the US really want to try to limit a potential war for the moment, even though they clearly stated that they would stand on the side of the Israeli allies. But regarding the US, they see more in a geopolitical regional dynamics, and they know that a potential regional war would weaken its own allies, Arab allies, Gulf allies, etc. in the region.
You would argue that there's very little doubt that Northern Front is opened in any significant way, rather than the tit for tat that is currently going on. That Hezbollah has already said, we're going to strike Cyprus. The Americans have said, we will join Israel. If Syria and the Iranian allies in Iraq and Iran, and then the Houthis, we're talking about oil prices above $200. This will be the United States finally completing the destruction of the Arab Persian world, where they brought democracy and hellfire from Libya to Iraq, etc., and completely fragmented the whole Middle East world. This is not going to be pretty.
No, but unfortunately, what I think is the most important to say that the actor that is creating most instability in the region is, first of all, Israel by its wars. First of all, genocidal wars against the Palestinians, but again, also through its escalating threats, actions, military actions against Lebanon, but again, also against, in various points of Syria. Iran, etc. And that it's supported completely by the US. And this is what I was mentioning for you before. We can clearly see that Israel is still playing a key role in Western US, led imperialism to guarantee US influence in the region. Also, how can we understand the push for further normalization between Israel and the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia, not without the ability of the US the willingness to consolidate influence in the region by this coalition, especially regarding the rising power of China. So what we can say is that the past decades, and especially since the 90s, with the kind of hegemonic power of the US on a world basis, US actions in the Middle East have only brought suffering to the people of the region. From the Oslo Agreement, from the war in Iraq in 2003, the support it brought to Israel, but also various authoritarian regimes that have been crushing their own population. So this is not only not going to be pretty, it's actually a continuous policy of destroying the region, of maintaining forms of authoritarianism, social injustice. We can see if we look only at most of the history of the Levant or Mashreq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, for various reasons, but most of the youth is leaving, destructions, wars, etc. So, obviously, what we are witnessing is something very scary, even for the future. And I would add something regarding Gaza. It's not only to transfer Gaza into an unhospitable place to live, but it's to make it, just as the West Bank in so many ways, but even worse, completely dependent on foreign assistance, without any ability to be able, to be self-autonomous. And this is also a practice, and this is obviously what we're witnessing in Gaza is the most barbaric form of Israeli actions, but the historical policy of Israeli occupation towards the Palestinian territories has been the development, preventing Palestinians to be able to live on their own, to be autonomous, economically self-sufficient, etc. This is a historic policy of Israel, and it has taken different forms. Today, we're witnessing the most barbaric form of it by this genocide.
And this is, part of that, the whole concept of Israeli hegemony in the region, which fits into Western imperialism and American hegemony over the entire world.
3CR Radiothon 2024. Sound on for solidarity.
We're here to show that the only choice is to deliver the environmental reforms we desperately need and to stop public money handouts and stop approving dangerous coal and gas projects that are driving the climate crisis.
The threats globally for our environment are also found in Palestine. There's climate change, there's habitat destruction, there's overexploitation of natural resources, there's pollution, invasive species, and there's of course wars and conflicts and colonialism.
We know that fossil fuel extraction and colonialism go hand in hand, and more often than not, it is overexploited communities that feel the brunt of it.
White phosphorus and depleted uranium and 2,000-ton bombs that are dropped on people. Even the jet fuels that jets flying bombing Gaza are producing greenhouse gases.
We need your support to keep radical voices and issues on the airwaves.
Sound on for solidarity.
To donate, call 03 9419 8377 or donate online at 3cr.org.au.
3CR. Sound on for solidarity.
We're joined by Professor Joseph Dahad, who's joining us from Switzerland. I want to ask you one more question. From the perspective of Lebanon, Hezbollah is not Lebanon, as Hamas is not Palestine. What's the general consensus in Lebanon about what's going on internally, but also the diaspora?
No, it's a very good question, and I think we have to be very nuanced when it comes to Hezbollah. First of all, Hezbollah, one of the reasons, there are several reasons, but one of the reasons they don't want a war is that they know they don't have a similar political, social support within Lebanon similar to 2006. In 2006, they had a much wider political support. If you remember, it was a few months after the Memorandum of Understanding between the Free Patriotic Movement, which is a big Christian Maronite-led movement, and Hezbollah. This is not anymore the case. Hezbollah has become more and more isolated outside of its Shia community. It does still have allies, but it's much more isolated, I would say, politically, socially, within the Lebanese population. And there's various reasons for this. First of all, Hezbollah has increasingly behaved politically just as the rest of the Lebanese, sectarian neoliberal political parties. They've been in power since 2005, following the withdrawal of the Syrian army from Lebanon that was occupying the country since 76, or part of Lebanon, at least. And they have not challenged neoliberal policies, social injustice. On the opposite, they have contributed to it very forcefully, more privatization. So they're considered, just as the rest of the Lebanese sectarian neoliberal political parties, responsible for the financial crisis that started in 2019. Secondly, the arms of Hezbollah has not been only used against Israel. This we knew historically. In the 80s, they attacked, various leftists, other groups, etc. But it became, the political discourse. Hezbollah was always to say we use our weapons against the Israeli enemy. In 2008, they used their weapons to take half of Beirut, okay, in a military sense. But moreover, in 2011, they entered Syria to support the Syrian, brutal dictatorship to crush an uprising. And they participated in various military conquests on the side of the Syrian army, actually, helping it very importantly, significantly, for example, in the conquest of eastern Aleppo in 2016. So they committed a lot of crimes, and you cannot claim to be on the sides of the oppressed while you help a dictatorship crush an uprising. And this is not to say that there were also afterwards throughout the same uprising, intervention from various sides. But Hezbollah in the first month already started to support the same regime very clearly. In the popular uprising of Lebanon, the Lebanese Intifada, how they called it in 2019, Hassan Nasrallah stood against the Lebanese protest movement, accusing it of being funded by foreign embassies. So ironically, a lot of Lebanese protesters told him, you're the actor the most supported by a foreign country, Iran. So ironically, the people were saying this was quite funny, and they sent their own supporters to crush, to attack protesters. So for all these reasons, and after you had also sectarian tensions mounting within Lebanon, and this is why, even the people, the political parties that support the Palestinian cause don't want to see a war in Lebanon, especially in a deep financial crisis. Most of the Lebanese people will say, we cannot support, in addition to the financial crisis, a war. So these are one of the reasons that Hezbollah knows it's much more, its political support, social support in the wider Lebanese community is much more limited, restricted than in 2006 because of its policies. Moreover, I think we have to be very clear, neither Iran nor Hezbollah's horizon is to liberate the Palestinian, but to gain geostrategically in the region. And Iran doesn't want its most important ally, actor in the region to be weakened by a war with Israel that would be destructive for Hezbollah and for Lebanon. So what they're trying, it's a modes of deterrence, which we have to acknowledge. Iran, with its various networks of actors, etc., have been able to create a mode of deterrence that is quite important against Israel and Western actors, etc., in the region. But their main objective is to, enter into negotiation with Western countries, especially the US, enable to have, to achieve some objective, end of sanctions, etc. This is why also you understand Iranian position since the 7th of October. But to come back to Hezbollah, in resume, they don't want a war. Or one of the reasons, it's not because they don't want to bring destruction, etc., but also they know they don't have a similar political support. And if a war, they will be blamed by certain Lebanese political parties, by sector of the population, for all the reasons I mentioned. Even though the main responsible remain, we can be opposed to Hezbollah politically, but it has the right to defend itself. Just as you said very correctly, Hamas is not Palestine, Hezbollah is not Lebanon, but both population have the right to defend themselves. It does not mean that we defend a political project, but the basis of any kind, I think, of political correctness is to say that the Lebanese and Palestinian people have the right to defend themselves against continuous occupation, aggression, and war.
Indeed. But if we look at it from a West perspective, an argument that is had by Palestinians and their advocates is Hamas is a resistance movement. Palestine is occupied. Lebanon, the Litani river gardens, not the Litani, the Sheba farms are occupied still. That is, of course, disputed by Israel. It says it's not, it's Syrian. And we've annexed it, so it's not Syria anymore, it's Israel. Wherein is there the space strategically for this not to be, open slather for Israel? I mean, and unfortunately, as we know, in its, fascistic genocidal sense, it's not going to limit itself to the south of Lebanon. It'll be bombing everything.
Definitely, and it has already. Actually, Lebanon has bombed the West Bekaa. It has bombed Akkar, which is in the north of Lebanon. It has targeted, if you remember, in January, it has assassinated Salah Aruri, number 2 high head of Hamas, in Dahieh, which is a key neighborhood, if you want, dominated by Hezbollah. So definitely, a potential war will not be limited to the south. It will, cover and target the whole of Lebanon, like in 2006. We have to be very clear. In 2006, the war was not limited to south of Lebanon, or there was an attempt by the Israelis, as usual, to try to divide and conquer by targeting, it's true, more Shia populated areas. This is very clear. And actually, this is where, if you remember, the term of Dahieh doctrine was born, which is used today in Gaza, meaning the wide destruction of civilian infrastructures in the objective of weakening the military actor we're opposing. But no, you're totally right to say that. And moreover, as I told you, I think the war will not be limited to Lebanon. It will be much more destructive and include various, other countries, most probably. So it would be absolutely catastrophic.
Well, Professor Joseph Dahad, thanks so much for joining us. Inshallah, some sense prevails and the West intervenes. And, if there was ever a reason to take out a leader, we would call on those powers that can to take out this Benjamin Netanyahu, who is only interested in his own political survival. And he knows once the war stops, he'll be held to account for the responsibility of October 7, but also for all of the challenges he had internally, domestic politics as well, and he'll be going to jail.
I think it's really important to say that we have a role, whether in Australia or in the West, in Switzerland, Europe, and the US, to pressure our governments to basically stop any kind of political, military, economic relationship with a state that is committing a genocide, that is violating human rights, and that we shouldn't have, just as they took a position regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine and rightly condemned, the same should be done regarding Israel. And this is why I think also the watchword, boycott, disinvestment section should be present everywhere. Just as, in the past regarding South Africa apartheid, it is unacceptable that Western governments that claim to be democratic continue to collaborate with an apartheid state that is committing a genocide. So we have a role to pressure our own governments to stop supporting this state.
Indeed, Joseph, there is no better way to finish the show. And listeners, to learn more about the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign, go to the APAN website, apan.org.au, apan.org.au. Professor Joseph Dahad joining us from Switzerland. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.
3CR Radiothon 2024. Sound on for solidarity.
Did you enjoy listening to that podcast? 3CR is a community radio station, and you, the listener, are a part of that community. Right now, it's our radiothon. We need you to pitch in with a few dollars to keep the station going. We can't do it without you. It's easy. Head to 3cr.org.au/donate.